Well, yesterday we left off in our conversation about Paul's word to Timothy, where he said there's coming a time where people won't listen, they won't put up with sound doctrine. And as I pointed out yesterday, it doesn't mean that they won't have any doctrine at all, because doctrine simply means that you have a belief system from which you basically navigate your life. Because life is full of a continuous flow of choices. You have to make decisions constantly. And what is the basis upon which those decisions are made? I mean, I even think of some simple area, a common area, like what you're going to eat, the food you choose to eat. One of the things that I came to discover, there was a lot of things on my diet that I really enjoyed that really weren't good for me, and they weren't making me healthier. And as you age and you begin to experience the aches and pains, particularly people, if you're like me, who have different arthritic issues and so forth, you begin to realize that there's some things that aggravate those problems, and there's some foods that actually help to ameliorate some of those problems. And so I began to make different choices about what I eat. I like to focus on eating foods that are alive, not foods that have been processed, things that are organic as opposed to things that may not be. I kind of gravitate towards foods that are raw as opposed to those who have been processed in one way or another. That's just me. I also like to eat raw fish, so I don't know what that tells you about it. But anyway, what he's talking about is that people begin to make life decisions based upon, first, the rejection of God's truth and the embracing of something else that they believe is true. And that's why, as we see a lot of people today who are deconstructing their faith, or who are changing the way they describe themselves, they're saying, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, and so forth. What they're really saying is that they're allowing themselves to be the decision maker based upon their perceptions of reality in the world around them. And the problem is that our perceptions are so limited. We are incredibly short-sighted individuals. And with that short-sightedness, we tend to have to confront issues. I mean, you think about, what am I going to do in 5 years from now? Well, quite frankly, I don't know what the world's going to be like in 5 years from now. I can't accurately predict that. I can look at history and say, according to the flow of history, this seems to be likely what's going to happen. But unless God prophetically speaks to you and prophetically prepares you, you're probably just kind of spitting into the wind and seeing what happens. And if you understand that metaphor, it's not really a very positive thing. But the whole point is that you find that there are a lot of people who are going away. And Paul went on to say that instead of following sound doctrine, instead of learning and listening to the scriptures as they learn them, they instead, he says, to suit their own desires. This word desire, it's called concupiscence. It's evil, lustful desires that grow out of really the carnal appetite, not from a knowledge of God. You see, God creates appetites in us for his truth. The word of God becomes something that once you taste of it, the psalmist said, you realize it's good, that it's sweeter than honey. And so the more you know the word, the more you read it and study it, the more you begin to develop an appetite and even a hunger for his word, and that you can desire his words even more, as David said in the Psalms, than my necessary food. But what happens when people are ignorant of the Bible aisle of their spiritual grocery store? They start going down those aisles that are filled with all those empty carbohydrates and those highly processed foods with their additives of aluminum and other heavy metals that are in them. And they begin to go after those things. And that's the thing I find that, I have to admit it, I love Doritos. I just really love them. And I rarely ever eat them. And when I do, I usually eat just one because I know how they're made. I know what's in them, and I know they're not good for me. But that doesn't mean I don't crave them. You see, we all have appetites for things that we know aren't good. And the struggle of the Christian life, especially as the Jewish rabbis used to kind of portray the decisions that we have to make, that on the one hand is goodness, on the other hand is evil. And mankind was put right in the middle and told, make the right choice. And so even though I know something is good, I might choose something that's evil because it tastes good at the moment. It's appetizing in the immediate. But it's the long-term implications and impacts, especially if it becomes a repeated, regular behavior in your life, that it begins to have a toxic effect upon your life. And you may have heard me use this explanation or description before, but sin is really the ultimate toxin, because when mankind took in sin, when he ingested sin, behaved in a sinful way, the immediate effect was death. And that's the idea of toxicity. It's something that will kill you, whether in small amounts or large amounts, depends on how fast it'll take you out. And sin is very similar, that if you sin in small amounts, it'll have its erosive effect upon your life. If you take deep dregs of it and gulp it down, it'll kill you rather quickly. And so he says, one of the things you'll find is that men on the one hand will reject what the Bible has to say, and then with that freedom from truth, they will use their liberty to indulge in things that are destructive, that are toxic. In order to salve their conscience and to ease their minds about these decisions, Paul goes on and says they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. You know, media is an amazing thing, and it was a writer long ago talked about he used the term, he said, we are entertaining ourselves to death. And the whole concept in this book, where he talked about the direction that culture was going as a result of television, was the fact that we were able to focus on things for pure entertainment value that had no direct edification. You know, the first man who really created the first television, his goal was to use it as an educational pulpit to help people become literate and influenced and learn about the world and so forth. And what it became reduced down to is some of the banal stuff that people watch for entertainment. And it's interesting, it gets into people's systems. So I know whole generations that grew up on Cheers or Seinfeld, and to this day, they're still referencing and going back to those things because it causes a kind of a warm cudgel in their soul, a sweet remembrance of their better days. But the reality is that it also promoted a whole lot of values that are ungodly. And they led people away from the gospel into some other things that were really destructive. And so it's kind of like when I was watching a biography on the Beatles one time, and so I was watching this documentary, and they're interviewing Paul McCartney. One of the things he said, we had this influence upon the world. We influenced the culture of the West in particular. And he said the sad thing is we didn't know what we were doing. We had no idea where we were going. We had no answers. We were more confused than the people that we were talking to. And I looked at that and I thought to myself, I was one of those people who thought they had the answers. And it became very clear as their lives progressed that they were as big a train wreck as anybody else was. But see, we live in this media era where suddenly we can access just about anything we want to hear. And so what we find is the most successful people, religious people, Christian people, are not people who teach sound doctrine. They're people who teach false doctrine. They're people who teach that the secret of life is to tap into God's flow of prosperity, and you be healthy, wealthy, and wise the rest of your life. Just send them your check every month, and they'll pray that God will bless you. And this has proliferated so that when you turn on what's Christian TV, it's pretty hard to find much that's really good, I'm sorry to say. And I can say that that's probably true not only of the radio waves, but even more so by the internet, says somebody who's on the internet. But that's the simple point, is that if you don't have a way of discerning what you're looking at, what you're listening to, you can end up gathering around you a whole bunch of teachers that make you feel really good about yourself. You can create your own designer faith. But he says what they'll do is they will turn your ears away from the truth and will turn you aside to myths. Mythos, a Greek word, literally means things that you believe are true but are nothing else but empty fables. And that's the sad thing, is a lot of people buy into doctrinal teachings, and they're not Bereans. They haven't really sought the scriptures to see if the things that they're being told are true. They just accept them because they want them to be true. And believe me, if I could automatically say, I want to be rich and I could become rich overnight, I would probably do that, even though the Bible says that's not really in your best interest. But the whole point is that that's what people want to believe, and so they sign on to anybody who tells them that's the truth. Well, friends, be careful about the things that you desire. Be careful about the things that you want, because there are some things that you can want that are not in your best interests. And that's why we really need to leave in the end the choices to God. That doesn't mean that God is going to put you in a situation where you're going to have to make a decision. In fact, you're going to find that all the time. But there's a huge difference between making a decision based upon faith and a decision that's made upon evil desires. Which one is motivating you? Which one is the real force in your life? And I've just learned from experience that everything I want isn't something that's good for me. But God does know what's good for me. And when I say, Lord, only what you have for me, that's all I want, that I find out that I end up choosing the things that are best for me and being blessed as a consequence. Well, we'll continue on as Paul continues on tomorrow. Blessings.